what we'll do is walk you through that and show you how some of the information changes along the way and talk you through some of the really important documents that you'll need to begin the process. Lane, thanks for making some time for us this afternoon. How are you?
Thanks, Brian. I'm doing good. It's a busy day, busy week.
Can imagine. Thanks for breaking away to walk through this application with us. I guess the first place we'll start with, is there any new information, anything that you would like to share with us that you've learned this week as you've talked about all things SBA?
We've definitely learned a lot this week. I think the conference I've been in, has about 1,000 participants, but over 130 of them are directly from SBA. So it's the people that created the PPP program, got to talk directly to the software developer that developed the SaaS software for the forgiveness process. So lots of updates, lots of things going on right now. But I think, Brian, just like when I talk about it, every one of these webinars it is ever changing. SBA is working, tirelessly behind the scenes to make the process better. And so there is really still no rush to get your forgiveness applications in, even though it is up and live. And one of the SBA contacts yesterday confirmed that they've received about 10,000 PPP forgiveness applications in. But as of yesterday afternoon, which I think is still the case today, they have not approved and paid any of those. So they're trying to make sure that the process works correctly, and that all of the information is accurate before they actually start approving those forgiveness applications and getting back to the lenders. So even though the application process is open, and we definitely welcome people to go ahead and submit their applications to us, the SBA has not approved a single one at this point. So it may be a little while. They reiterated multiple times that they have up to 90 days to review. And they highly anticipate probably using that full 90 days in a lot of cases. And if they have to review your file for any reason whatsoever, like do a deeper dive into it, it could potentially even take more than the 90 days.
Yeah, I think that's great info and a great place for us to start, Lane. That's been pretty consistent with us with the message in the beginning over the first couple of weeks here, is that we are ready. Pinnacle's site is up. We're ready to begin the applications for forgiveness, but there really isn't a whole lot of need to be in a rush to get your forgiveness application in. There's a couple of circumstances I know that we've discussed before, and maybe I'll let you touch on those, that if people have a couple of different circumstances that they'll be dealing with, that might be good for them to jump in and start the forgiveness process. But for most of us, it would be really wise to sort of wait and kind of see if some of the legislation changes the process or changes who does need to even go through the application process of forgiveness, and just kind of wait and see how it all plays out.
No, that's accurate. Yeah, I mean, SBA definitely was closed-lipped on anything having to do with a blanket forgiveness, just because nothing has been passed through Congress. And so that could be a potential change that comes down the road. And I think SBA and the banks, we would all welcome that, because that's only going to help us kind of get through these applications faster than if every single one of them. So, there's no rush. So let's see what Congress can come up with. If, they can all get on the same page. I think they all want some sort of blanket forgiveness, but whether or not they can actually come to an agreement and come up with something that can actually be voted on is still yet to be determined.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. So as we get started today, Lane, I think what I would share with our guests is this webinar will probably be a little different than most of our webinars. What we've tried to do in the last few webinars is go through all the updated information and go through all the changes. And then we do a lot of Q&A where we'll take questions from our guests and try to help them work through their situation. What we're going to do today is actually walk through the application process and actually fill in the information so that everyone can actually see how this process actually works out. We'll do very limited Q&A. If you have a question about the functionality of the application, please feel free to go ahead and ask us a question about that. But if it's a specific question about your business and whether or not something could be included or not included in your specific forgiveness process, we want to try to save those and maybe have those conversations with your financial advisor. We have done a couple of these on forgiveness already, and they're out on our YouTube channel. If you go to youtube.com/Mark watch PNFP, you can go find all of those. The last one we did was really great because it gave you all the documents that you'll need to be ready to start your forgiveness process. And I know one that we've seen, Lane, already, one of the issues that's come up is we've started to get a couple of applications. People are not including their 941s. And so it's really critical that they have those to include with their forgiveness application. Is that right?
That is really true. So they don't need it when they're sitting down and they're filling out the application. So I can understand why it would be easy for them to forget when sending that over to us. However, the SBA has said they will not review a forgiveness application if it's missing that piece of documentation. So if you don't have them yet for whatever quarter it is you're submitting payroll for, it would probably be best for you just to wait until you get those documents before you actually submit it to the bank for that forgiveness, because we are definitely looking for that supporting documentation to be able to do our bank internal review before we send it off to SBA for them to do their review. But that's what they're going to be looking for. They're going to be checking those boxes to see, did you do the application, whether it was the 3508 or the 3508EZ, then they're going to be checking for all of the supporting documentation. So the payroll supporting documentation, which would be those 941s, and then all the supporting documentation for the non-payroll related expenses.
Yeah, and I know that we've talked with lots of clients, and they've got great third-party payroll partners who have put together lots of great documents and forms, and I think those are probably really helpful as they go through the application process and using our calculator to complete those forms. But to your point, the SBA is definitely going to be looking for the 941, so they do need to be sure that in addition to whatever their payroll provider offers, or maybe something that they're using internally to keep up with the information, that they do include those 941s when they do go through the forgiveness process.
Yeah, Brian, and I just saw a question pop up, is there a checklist that tells me what information is needed? And yes, there actually is a lovely, I wouldn't necessarily call it a checklist, but it's a tool that we've put out there that's on our PPP forgiveness website that does let you know, depending on how your company is organized, whether you're a general partnership, an LLC, a sole proprietor, it'll tell you what documentation is required as part of the forgiveness application. And so that is available to you on our website. And then Brian, I believe that was in the email that went out as well. I'm not 100% sure on that, but
no, I believe that's correct. So that the website is pnfp.com/PPP forgiveness. And that's where all of the most current information, all of our calculators, all of the forms that you'll need, and then as it relates to your specific business and how your business is structured, we've got a team of people that have done a phenomenal job of listing the exact documents that you'll need to reference as you go through the calculator and the application process. So that's pnfp.com/PPP forgiveness. So Lane, I guess let's jump in and let's look at the application. Again, for Pinnacle, it's going to be an online process. So we've actually worked with Numerated, and they've created an online application process for you, our clients, to use as you walk through the PPP forgiveness process. And what we're going to do today is demonstrate for you how the information on the calculator tool that we've created can then take that information and flow directly into your online forgiveness application. So Lane, I'll let you take it from here, and we'll walk our clients through the process and what it's going to look like for them to actually complete their application.
Yes, thank you, Brian. So, Brian, thank you for kind of getting this information all put together here in this lovely calculator that we have. So this is going to be your first step in kind of completing the application. So you want to make sure that you have the calculator all pulled up and that you already have gathered all of your documents to start inputting your information into the actual calculator. So let's go over to the first tab on the calculator here. There we go. So we have a fun little business here that we made up for Mickey Mouse House of Fun. And so they got all their information and they're ready to start filling out their PPP forgiveness application. One of the things to note on here is there is a section here on the EIDL Advance. And so that was one thing that SBA this weekend, the conference I've been attending, gave us some good feedback on how those advances are going to factor in. So we do want you to input that onto the front page of the application. But when you get your final forgiveness number, you'll notice that that EIDL grant or advance piece didn't get backed out of your forgiveness total from this side of it when we do it from the bank side. However, when it goes to SBA is going to deduct that EIDL advance amount from the forgiveness amount that they sent back to the bank, because essentially what they were doing was advancing you part of that forgiveness up front. So it doesn't mean you didn't get full forgiveness. You did get full forgiveness, but you got $2,000 of it in an advance up front in the case of Mickey Mouse House of Fun. So when they come to pay us back as the bank, they're going to have $2,000 deducted from that PPP balance before they send that money back to the bank, even if you still got full forgiveness. So just a kind of housekeeping issue there, Brian, to make sure people kind of understand how that works, because it was a little confusing to me up front. So I'm sure it's also going to be confusing to our clients out there if they got an EIDL advance, which I think is a lot of our folks. I'm hearing of a lot of people that got those EIDL advances. And if you did pay it back for one reason or another, I have heard of some instances where people paid back their EIDL advance. Those should be deducted, or SBA should recognize that and not deduct that from your forgiveness amount. But if for any reason they don't, then we will have to kind of escalate that up with SBA, and that process could take a little while.
And it's probably a good time to talk about the difference between the actual EIDL and the EIDL advance. The maximum advance amount was $10,000, correct?
That's correct, Brian. So it should be anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 would be the potential amount that would be deducted from your PPP loan. So if you got a full EIDL grant, say for $100,000, they're not going to deduct $100,000 from your PPP loan. They're only going to deduct that forgiveness piece of it.
I think that's very helpful. Let's work on through the calculator now.
Yeah, definitely. So the calculator will feed in from some of the other tabs. So just for the sake of us doing this presentation, we're going to go to tab number 2, which is the payroll aggregator tab. We already kind of pre-filled information into this, but if you don't use a third-party payroll service, this is where you would need to kind of input every single one of your employees and how much they get paid. As you see here, Brian has already input all of this information for us, but if you do use a third-party payroll processor, you can actually just give us the records you get from your third-party payroll, but make sure you put the total in here at that green line at the bottom. Is that correct, Brian?
That's correct, because then that'll feed over to the tab number 1 for the total amount of payroll that you've used during that period.
We got a lot of questions too early on as to what falls into that owners category versus the employee section. And I just want to reiterate that any owner of the business, whether they're a 1% owner or a 100% owner, their information will get input into that owner section. So it doesn't matter if you're an owner that gets a W-2 or you're an owner that takes a quarterly draw. Any way you get paid by the business, and if you're an owner and have any ownership percentage whatsoever, you need to be calculated in that ownership section.
What if the owners applied separate from the business? So if they filed one PPP application for the W-2 employees of the business, but then the owners filed separately, Lane, would they include that information here, or would they simply list their information and then file a separate calculator for themselves?
Yeah, Brian, that is a great question. So if owners did say they have a general partnership and they filed separately, each partner did, they filed for their own PPP loan for themselves individually, and then filed for one PPP loan for the business and input all their employees for that application, then they would actually have to complete 3 forgiveness applications, one for each one of the partners. They would do their own as a sole proprietor in essence, and then they would do a separate one for their company where they input all their employees. And so in the owner section, when they're doing their PPP forgiveness application for the corporation, they would just put the employees. They would not put themselves in as owners because they are not going to be taking any PPP funds from that application. They would just do that for the one that they did individually for themselves. as either a self-employed or contract, however they submitted that to SBA. So that is a
Yeah.
little confusing as well.
Yeah, so I think it's probably important that we make the note at the top portion of the payroll aggregator that they do have the option here of choosing the 8-week or the 24-week period, and then that will automatically pre-fill the dates and the time frames and all of it for the calculator.
Yes, that's correct. That is a good point there. So the next tab that we go to is going to be the non-payroll related expenses. And so, Brian, we've got the question a couple of times. If we used 100% of the funds on payroll, is that okay? And that is fine. So some people may not even use the non-payroll expense tab because they may have chosen to use 100% of their PPP funds on payroll and not to have used any of it on non-payroll related. But if you did use it for non-payroll related, that is absolutely fine. One thing that SBA definitely reiterated this week was that the payroll related expenses are only during your covered period. So if you choose an alternative period for your payroll, which you can do for payroll related expenses, you can choose a period that may run outside of your covered period, which the covered period was whenever you receive the funds. And you can choose 24 weeks or 8 weeks, but it only runs through that period. The non-payroll related expenses are only during that covered period. So even if you chose an alternative period for your payroll, you don't then get to use the alternative period for your utilities. So just
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's also, that's something that's on the form, and it will pre-fill that information. So if you do choose an alternative period for the payroll, the form will update and it'll populate for you. And then you've got a covered period for the non-payroll expenses, and that will work off of that as well. So it's a lot of that work's already done for you, and you can't change any of those information. So you can just work right through it.
Exactly. Yeah, we tried to kind of lock out some of the fields here so that on information that we don't want to see changed, it stays the same. But this form is pretty self-explanatory. You're going to enter in, the week number, the day it started, the end date, and then you're going to put in whatever that expense was. So whether it was transportation, electricity, gas, water, your phone, internet bill, your mortgage interest statements. You want to input all of this in this little form here. And then you also, Brian, want to make sure that you have all the supporting documents to go with those. And then it's going to total that number up and bring it back over to our tab, the first tab on the list here. Let's go back to that first tab. There we go. So it's going to bring it all back to this little section, and then it should total it all up and tell you what your forgiveness amount will be, and if you have any remaining left that would turn into a loan here at Pinnacle. And so you may have some questions. This lovely applicant here for Mickey Mouse's House of Fun fortunately gets 100% forgiveness and will not have a loan with us. But if you do end up getting a loan with us, we are going to need to go back and do some note modification. So if for some reason you don't get 100% forgiveness, you'll want to definitely reach out to your FA to make sure you can get payment terms and everything ironed out on paying back whatever that balance is that you didn't get forgiven.
Well, I think that's helpful to look at the calculator. Now let's transition to the actual application and see how we take that information and input it into our online forgiveness application.
Awesome. Well, Brian, I was actually pleasantly surprised when this came out last week of how easy this was for us to use. Now, the key here is going to be that you have the correct information to input to make sure that it pulls up your application correctly. So we're going to be using your business email. So whatever email that we emailed you those DocuSign documents with, is going to be the email address that you're going to input here. Then you're going to be using your business tax ID number. But I think in some instances, Brian, they may use their social. Can you tell us a little bit about when they may use their social instead of the business tax ID number?
Yep. So if they filed self-employed and they do have a business tax ID, if they search using their business name and their business tax ID, if they're self-employed, there's a good chance that the loan will only pull up underneath their personal name and their personal social security number. So if they get into the system, they input their email and they try to use the business tax ID and don't have success pulling it up, the advice is to use your social security number and do a search that way, and it should pull up using the social security number if it doesn't pull up using the business tax ID.
That sounds good. All right. Well, so for this one, we're going to use that business tax ID number. And then if you can remember your original PPP loan amount, which would be the loan amount that you got on the documents that were originally emailed to you. So once you plug all that in, you're going to hit Find My Loan, and it should just pull your loan right up in the system to where it's going to generate the application based off the information from your original PPP loan request. So here you see that it populated all that information. Now it's going to come to 3 important questions for you on here that we need to get answered that are going to determine whether or not you use the easy application form or you have to use the long form. So I would definitely just, verify that all that information in there is correct, and then go to looking at these questions here. So if you can answer any of these questions, so it doesn't mean that you have to answer all 3 of them as yes, but as long as you can answer one of them as yes, then you can move forward with using the easy application. If you answer all of them no, then you would need to actually use the long form. So I think that's important to note here. Then it should pull up the number of employees that you have from the original application. And so if you need to make any adjustments there, you need to reach out to your FA, but that should pull up those there. And then you're going to input the number of employees at the time of your forgiveness application. Now, one thing I think that's important to note on entering the number of employees at the time of your forgiveness application is if you chose the 24-week time period and you're applying for forgiveness before the end of that 24 weeks, you are attesting as part of this application that you are keeping that head count at the time of forgiveness application, that you're keeping that throughout the end of the 24 weeks. So that's just something important to remember there. Now, SBA may come out, Brian, and have some updates to that, but as it sits right now, if you choose the 24-week time period and you're inputting that employee number there, you're going to attest that you're going to keep that same head count through the end of the 24-week time period.
Yeah, and I know that's something we've addressed in previous webinars together, that you do have the option of choosing the 8-week period or the 24-week period. And just because you choose the 24-week period doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to take you the full 24 weeks to utilize all of your funds. In most cases, people will be able to use 100% of their funds on payroll over and before the 24-week period ends. But to your point, if they begin the forgiveness process before the end of that 24-week period, which they can do, you can begin the forgiveness process once you've utilized all of your funds. To your point, as it stands right now, they would need to maintain their head count to avoid any potential penalties from the SBA.
That's correct. So I did see some questions out there. We're now to the section where you input your EIDL advance amount. So that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So I'm seeing some questions on what is that. That is the program through the SBA. If you applied for disaster relief directly with the SBA and you checked that you wanted to receive an advance and they sent you a check or they deposited money right into your bank account, anywhere between the amounts of $1,000 to $10,000, as Brian and I talked about earlier, that amount goes in right here on the application. If you don't know that amount, just so you know, when we submit these back to SBA, if you happen to not know your amount or you put 0 in there because you just misunderstood, SBA is still going to back out that advance amount from the PPP forgiveness money that comes back over to the bank. So if all possible, find that EIDL amount. If you have one, not everybody's going to have one. Enter it in here and then enter your original EIDL loan application number as well if you have that. Then you're going to go down to your payroll schedule. So this is where you're going to pick on what type, do you pay weekly? Do you pay monthly? Do you pay bi-weekly? You're going to pick one of these here, depending on how your accounting runs for your payroll. And then you're going to choose whether you're picking the 24 weeks or the 8-week time period. And then it's going to actually pre-fill depending on which option you choose. If you choose the 24 weeks or the 8 weeks, it's going to tell you what your covered period is. So we've got you covered there, Brian. You just check one of those boxes and we will tell you what your covered time period is going to be. And then we are going to check of whether or not your loan is in excess of $2 million or not. And we know that if you took out a PPP loan of $2 million or more, that those are going to go through a full review with SBA. And SBA has said as of this week that they are still fine tuning exactly what that process is going to look like. So I don't really think that anybody knows yet if you got a loan for $2 million of exactly what's going to be required there when you submit for forgiveness. So if you have one of those, Brian, I would probably hold off and wait till SBA gets a little bit more information there. There's definitely no rush to submit an application that's $2 million or more for forgiveness right now. Then it's you're going to pull in from the calculator that you did. You should just be able to input. There we go. There's a beautiful calculator. You're going to be able to take those line items directly off the calculator and feed them right into this form. So, Brian, honestly, I think you and I both have played around with it. Once you got the calculator done, the calculator is what took probably the bulk of the time. Once you get that information done, I mean, it took me about 5-10 minutes just to input all of that information into the actual application for forgiveness with Numerated once you had all that information available.
Yeah, the calculator makes it pretty simple for filling the information out. It's simply then a process of transferring the numbers, copy and paste, however you want to do them. But it really is just a matter of moving the information from the calculator into the application.
Yep, there we go. So now you see how it calculates the information there, and it looks like it did calculate our forgiveness gap, which is that EIDL loan that's there. So letting you know that you did get full forgiveness, but there would be that $2,000 remaining once SBA pays us back off, if I'm correct. I can't see all the information that's being put in there, but I think that's what we came up with once we got all the payroll information. But it's, as you guys can see here, it is a really easy, simple application depending on how complicated your payroll is. Now, for those companies out there that have a pretty large, complicated payroll, this isn't going to be as easy as what it was for the Mickey Mouse House of Fun. But for most of you guys that are filling out this application, it really just shouldn't be that tedious and shouldn't take that long. Brian, have you heard from any of your clients that have actually gotten this far and gotten through the application with us? Have they had any hiccups or any best practices for getting their information into this format?
No, I think the biggest thing, Lane, I've had a couple of people that have already begun the process, and I think we hit on it earlier, probably a great time to revisit it and also plug the website where all the information is. The couple of clients that I've had that have jumped in and started the application process, they didn't include some of the forms that we need. And so that's the biggest key item. It's not the end of the world. What we'll do is we'll send them an email and just say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, there's some information that we still need from you. And in both cases, it happened to be tax documents. For one, it was a Schedule C from a self-employed individual. The other, it was a 941 that they didn't provide the information for. So the application process itself worked very smooth for them, and they were able to work through it pretty quick. It's just a matter of providing all the documentation that we're going to need to be able to pass on to the SBA for them to review to make sure that that's there. So we'll plug it again. pnfp.com/PPP forgiveness has all of the information. You can know all that there is about the forgiveness process, but then also some really great tools for the documents that you'll want to gather as you begin to fill out the calculator, and then take the calculator and fill out the online application for us. So pnfp.com/PPP forgiveness.
Yeah, Brian, and that's a good point. I have a lot of people asking, well, where do they provide that documentation? So if we continue to scroll down on the application here, we're not quite through this. You're going to, check those two check boxes, confirm the primary information. So, Brian, when they submitted their original application to us, they were able to have, multiple people at the company kind of, sign it and send it over. Here, we want the primary business owner to be the one that submits the application to us. I know in some instances people have said they're wanting their CPA to kind of help with this. One of the things that we heard back from SBA this week on the forgiveness process is that it is fine for your CPA to kind of help with putting your payroll information together, but as far as completing and attesting to this application, it really needs to be the business owner. Your CPA cannot attest that you kept your head count the same and you promised to keep your head count the same and that you use the money correctly, because your CPA is not the one that spent the money. The business and the business owner is the one that spent these funds. So that is important, that the business owner and the primary owner is the one that completes this application, attests to those items that have to be attested for SBA to be able to submit the application. And that's not being done by some third party, whether that's a CPA or employee of the company. It really needs to be done by the owner. So once you check those two boxes, you're going to be able to submit it, and then that's going to pop up to allow you to attach some of these documents. So then you'll get to where you can actually upload within this form those non-payroll and payroll documents to support the information that you've put in here. So it should be a very, easy process to upload documents here. And as you can see right now on the screen, this is where you're going to upload those tax forms, any cash compensation. You can upload your health insurance and your retirement information here. On leases, we definitely want to remind people that for leases, if your lease renewed in the middle of your PPP time period, you're going to need to provide us a copy of that lease renewal and your original lease in order to count that towards your payments for forgiveness.
Yeah, so it's really truly a completely online process. Maybe a little different than it was on the application for the actual loan to begin with, where clients were sending us emails and attachments and documents and all types of information. We've got the application out there available for them online, and then they'll just simply go through and upload all the documents straight into the portal just like this. And then our team will begin to review it. And then if there are items that are missing, they should, again, be sure that they take careful time to input their email correctly, because that's how we'll communicate with you. Your financial advisor will get communication in addition to any communication that goes back, but that's how we'll correspond and ask for additional documents, or maybe if there's some additional clarification that needs to be made, we'll communicate through email with you as your loan goes through the forgiveness process.
Definitely. Well, Brian, as you can tell, I think it is a very quick and easy process. It will be more complicated depending on the complexity of, the business's payroll, and whether they're using the easy form or the long form. But just a few things to point out. Once you submit everything for forgiveness and you've uploaded all these documents, that doesn't mean you need to wipe your hands with all of this fun forgiveness documentation. So SBA has said that you need to hold on to all of this documentation for at least 6 years. And I've heard from several attorneys that it would actually be a best practice to keep everything for 10 years due to statutes of limitations. So if SBA ever comes back and questions the file, for fraud or any other reason, the statute of limitations for that is actually 10 years. So even though the SBA says to keep it for 6 years, 6 years is really the minimum. You probably want to hold on to all your documents for at least 10 years. And do know that SBA will be doing a review of this when we submit it to them for forgiveness, but they may not be doing a deep dive. So there may be something, they may grant forgiveness of your loan, but they still may come back 12 months, 2 years down the road if they start reviewing more of these files for potential discrepancies. So you want to make sure you hold on to that information. I mean, we're not anticipating that SBA is going to do that, but you just never know. So I would definitely hold on to all of the documentation for at least that minimum of 6 years. And I would probably, me being a banker and not a very big risk taker here, I'd probably hold on to all of it for 10 years just because I like to file away and hold on to everything.
Yeah, it's certainly not going to hurt anything to hang on to all of those informations and the supporting documents, just in case down the road something gets.
Just in case, yeah, you just never know. And SBA has said, so there will be instances that, the bank says everything looks good. We think it's going to be forgiven. It gets sent over to SBA and SBA finds something that, we maybe missed, or they look at something different from how you and I looked at it, Brian. And they may, for one reason or not grant full forgiveness. And if that happens, there is an appeal process with SBA, but SBA reiterated that appeal process is between SBA and the applicant for the loan. So it's not between the bank and SBA. At that point, if the applicant wants to, go back and question that forgiveness, that back and forth is going to be between them and SBA directly. The bank is really not involved at that point in that debate of whether or not it was fully forgiven, if for some reason they want to go back and question that. So we don't anticipate that happening in a lot of instances. I don't know about you, Brian, but most of the clients I've talked to, they used 100% of the funds on payroll. They didn't even really need to use it on the non-payroll related expenses, especially when the 24 weeks was extended. So I heard from several clients that once they extended it to 24 weeks, they just said, well, why don't I use 100% of it on payroll so that I'm 100% sure it's forgiven? So I think that'll be most of the cases that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And, for topics like that and questions that people might have about use of funds and allowable and all that, those are things that we've covered in our previous webinars, and probably, again, another good chance to plug our YouTube site where all of those are resting. If you would like to go back and review those as you're kind of preparing yourself to go through the process of forgiveness, that's www.youtube.com/watchpnfp. And there are several wonderful webinars there where Lane has walked through everything that she has known about the PPP forgiveness process. So we would encourage you to go check those out. Lane, I know a couple of questions that we've gotten today that have been repeat questions is actually about as they go through the application process. People want to know, hey, if something comes up, can I go in and save my progress and then jump back in to do that? Yes, you absolutely can. So there's a button that will allow you to save your application as you go through the application process. If you need to save your progress and come back and revisit later, or if you need to save your process and go get additional documentation to be able to upload it, you can absolutely go through and start completing that application and then just save your progress and come back and finish it later. And then I know, Lane, one question I've gotten this week from clients, and it looks like we've got several questions today, is regarding headcount. And I know that's something people are really interested in, where the SBA kind of finally landed on that, specifically with employees who chose to quit, or if they were terminated with cause, how does that impact their forgiveness amount? And Lane, I guess I'd let you speak to that.
Yeah, no, those are good questions. And so one of the nice things that SBA did do, and one of the PPP Flexibility Act was one of the changes that kind of made some broad sweeping changes to the PPP program. And one of those changes was just kind of clarifying that. So if you have an employee that quits on their own, so you did not, you didn't let them go, they decided to leave on their own, they do not count against your forgiveness. So you would just remove them from that head count number altogether. And then same thing, if you have to terminate somebody with due cause, So say somebody was stealing from you, or somebody just hasn't shown up to work for a week. Well, obviously you need to get that person off your payroll. And so if you can document for us, and show the bank and show SBA that that person was terminated with cause, that person will not count in your numbers as well. Now, the caveat on both of these is that you have to report this information to the payroll office so that they're not getting the benefits from disability, or any of the other benefits that they can get from the government. So they can't be double dipping and getting a payroll benefit from the government and being discounted from your PPP numbers. So I think that's something important to note there. But they did give that qualification. And then, Brian, another question we're getting a lot of is on the Safe Harbor Act, that it was extended to the end of the year. But what happens if you want to apply for payroll before the end of, or I'm sorry, not payroll, apply for forgiveness before the end of the year? You still have to attest that you're going to hit that head count by end of the year. So if you can't, today, say you're done with your money, but you wanted to wait because you're going to staff back up and have your head count at full capacity in December, well, then you would just need to wait till December then to come back and apply for the loan, because at this point you're not at that head count number, and you're attesting today that you got back up to those levels. So it was really nice that SBA extended that, because I think we have several business owners that, whether you're a restaurant or, movie theater, somebody that's not being able to operate at full capacity right now, you may need those extra weeks to be able to ramp up, but you may have already utilized all of your PPP numbers, and that shouldn't count, against you and be deducted from your forgiveness, because you do have until the end of the year to get that head count back up.
Yeah, I think those are helpful, Lane. I think, again, the things that we would plug for our guests today is our website, www.pnfp.com/PPP forgiveness. That's got all of the information that they will need. It's got the tools, the calculators, all the documents that you would need depending on your business structure, so that you can start gathering those and begin the process of filling out the calculator to then transfer into your online application process. I think you've hit it early, and we'll cover it again now. Unless there are some really significant extenuating circumstances, maybe you didn't utilize all of your funds, or there's going to be a transition in your business ownership. Those are really only a couple of the real reasons to be in a hurry to get your forgiveness application processed. There's still lots changing. You're in the middle of a conference right now talking about all the different things that are going on. So it's important to maybe just kind of wait, go ahead, gather your information, make sure that you're keeping good records and have all of it together, but maybe just be patient with the actual forgiveness application process as we continue to watch things play out. And then again, continue to tune into our YouTube channel, where people can find all of these webinars that we've recorded. There's lots of great information out there that they can go back and watch, and they can go back and watch this one again, or pass along to somebody in their office that may be helping them with their application process as we've walked through it today. Lane, anything else that you think we need to cover before we wrap up today?
Well, I do keep seeing the question out there on the blanket forgiveness, and, has that been voted on? And it hasn't, but I promise you, Brian, you do a great job at leading our YouTube channel and getting good content out there. So I know if Congress does have some changes, that you'll be the first one to get that information out to them, so that they know, they don't have to even apply for forgiveness if they do the blanket forgiveness. But at this point, nothing has been passed through Congress. So just want to reiterate that even though there are bills floating out there, nothing has been brought for a vote. And as it looks right now, there's nothing scheduled to be voted on anytime in the near future. So we're not anticipating that there's going to be any sort of blanket forgiveness that pops up in the next week or so. But if that changes, we will definitely keep you all posted. But Brian, to your point, that's just another reason to potentially hold off on submitting these applications, because it could become even easier to submit for forgiveness in the very near future. And I did see a lot of very specific questions out there, depending on how, your company runs payroll, or if they run payroll, maybe bi-weekly for one set of employees and they run it monthly for another set of employees. So those types of questions, I would encourage you to get with your financial advisor here at Pinnacle. We definitely want to get you the answers to those, but we need to analyze each individual scenario and work with you individually on getting those types of questions and answers, finalized and formalized, because I'm not 100% sure myself, Brian, if you run payroll under two different processes, exactly how that would work in our forgiveness application. But I know that our team here at Pinnacle, they can figure it out for us.
Yeah, we've got a lot of sharp people that are reading and watching it. And, we know most people's situation is very individualized and really specific. And so what we've tried to do with these webinars is provide the general information and provide some of the rules and how things will impact everybody. But then we do encourage you to have a conversation with your financial advisor, have a conversation with your CPA or your bookkeeper, attorneys, and just make sure that you know exactly how all of this information impacts your business, so that you can make the best decisions possible. Somebody's got a question about deadline, Lane. I guess with the extending to 24 weeks, they've got quite a bit of time before they have to worry about having to worry about the application for forgiveness process, right?
Yeah, there is really no deadline out there right now. So once they get to the end of their, they can wait all the way to the end of their 24 weeks. But one of the nice things that SBA did in that PPP Flexibility Act is their loan payments will be deferred until SBA decisions their loan for forgiveness. So there's not a true deadline really pending out there. You can wait until the end of the 24 week, take your time, put together your information, get it back over to us. And SBA is going to continue to defer your principal and interest payments until it actually gets decisioned by SBA of what the forgiveness amount is going to be. So there's just not a big rush out there at this point. At first they were deferring that for only 6 months, but now they're deferring the full principal and interest until SBA has actually reviewed your application and determined what portion of it would be forgiven. And when they do pay us, Brian, they will pay back whatever interest has also accrued during that time. So I think that's an important thing to remember. And I don't, it's just my opinion, but, if SBA is paying that interest, I think it's going to be incentive for them to kind of get these applications processed as quick as possible as well.
Yeah, I think that's all very helpful. Well, Lane, I know that it's been a busy week for you. I know you were in meetings right up until we jumped on this call today, and I'm sure you've got more things to do after this. So we'll let you get back to it. We're thankful that you spent some time with us walking through the application and answering some of those questions. And I have a feeling we'll be doing this again somewhere down the road. So thanks for making time, and I guess we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Brian. Hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Absolutely. We hope you all stay safe. Continue to check our website for additional tools and updates as we continue to have them. Check the YouTube channel, watch PNFP for additional webinars. This one should be out within the next 24 hours or so. And then, we encourage you to have conversations with your financial advisor to address your specific situation. So thanks for spending time with us today, and we wish you well.